Chase, we want to start with your tweet. You tweeted out yesterday, Jed York and the 49ers have dished out a lot of big money deals since the 2023 offseason. This accounts for nearly $1 billion with a B in contracts, mostly homegrown players. And you have a picture here of the players. It's Brock Purdy, Nick Bosa, Brandon Ayuk, Demo Lenore, Trent Williams, Kyle Juszczyk, Christian McCaffrey, Fred Warner, George Kittle. So, I mean, you know, you can have, not you, but people can have whatever complaints they want to have about Jed. But you know what? I get the sense that Jed made zero of those decisions to extend any of those players. And is just listening to his football people and kind of doing what they advise him to do. Doesn't that make Jed a top-tier NFL owner?
Yeah, look, you know, earlier this offseason, I know that I had voiced some concerns about what the Niners were doing at the time, and they had let a lot of free agents walk. They had cut players that I thought were unnecessary cuts because after they let go Malik Collins and Leonard Floyd, after all of those free agents walked, you're looking at that defensive line and you're saying, Evan Anderson, Jordan Elliott are going to be the starting defensive tackles potentially going into the draft. And then Sam Okuanu or your Turgos Matos are going to battle it out to start opposite of Nick Bosa. And I was concerned that the Niners were going the cheap route because last year in 2024, they spent $330 million in cash and they did all of that and they went 6-11. But here we are a few months later. And when you combine all of the contracts that the Niners have dished out, starting with Nick Bosa going into 2023, it does total up to nearly $1 billion. And the key themes of these deals, a lot of them are homegrown players. So it goes to show you that John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, the scouting department, this front office, they have done a pretty good job despite some misses, but everybody has misses of hitting on picks in the NFL draft. And obviously a couple of those other players are really special players who aren't technically homegrown. Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey, technically Kyle Juszczyk because he started his career with the Baltimore Ravens. But one thing you can't say about the Niners, you can call them chokers. You can say that they have come up small in a lot of big games, and there's evidence to back up those claims. You can't call them cheap. And they haven't gone the cheap route because they have been very aggressive in their team building strategy and with their financial spending. And I don't think that Jed York has been the one who has said, okay, we have to do this, we have to do that. Any good owner would leave that up to their head coach and their general manager. That's what Jeffrey Lurie does with Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni. I think that's the best way to run an organization is to have a collaborative approach. But Jed York has signed off on these contracts because he is the owner. And so I do think that he does deserve credit for that. He's been very aggressive in trying to put the Niners in a position to win a Super Bowl. They have been aggressive over the last couple of years in trying to attain that goal. And a lot of people will whip Jed York and say, he hasn't won the Super Bowl. He doesn't have a Lombardi trophy as an owner. You are right. But the Niners have also been one of the most successful organizations in the National Football League over the last few years. And up until last year, they had made it to 4 NFC titles and 2 Super Bowls over the last 5 years before they fell flat on their faces last year and went 6-11. So as a fan, you want your team to be in championship contention. Check that box off. The Niners have been. You want your team to care. You want your team to be aggressive. You want your team to spend money on football. And all of those things are also true as well. So I would say that Jed York has been one of the top owners in the NFL.
So I think Jed gets unfairly blamed. I really do. I think it's just he's an easy punching bag for a lot of reasons. Most notably, he's not Eddie D, right? And Eddie D was a great owner, and he's become even greater. Now that he's no longer there, right? You know, as time goes on, the idea of Eddie D is even more popular than Eddie D, and even Eddie D would admit that he couldn't operate the same way that he did in the 80s and 90s, giving wives and girlfriends of players lavish gifts, flying the team to resorts after the season to celebrate. Spending millions of dollars in that he didn't need to spend just to make his players happy and comfortable and feel loved. Those days have come and gone with the advent of the salary cap. Now, the one thing about this channel and the reason that, the channel's growing and your channel's growing is that there are people that no matter what the Niners do, they will rip it and tell you they're wrong.
Yep.
There are people out there in our space that no matter what the Niners do, they will work back from that and figure out how to make it right. Right? So there's the yes men who are like, anything the Niners do, I mean, they could literally blow up Levi's Stadium and they'd be like, it was by design, guys. You know what I mean? It was meant to be blown up, And then there's the people that they could draft, they could concoct the very greatest deal for Brock Purdy ever, and they're still going to be like, they got taken, they got hosed, the Niners are idiots. So there's the negative Niners side, there's the positive Niners side. I think that our channels have grown pretty rapidly because we deliver both, right?
Yeah.
We don't just deliver the good news and we don't just deliver the bad news. We're not sitting here just packaging up haterade every day, but at the same time, we're not just sitting here, give me a 4, give me a 9, give me an E, give me an R, what does that spell? So we rip when they need to be ripped. And here's one area the Niners need to be ripped. The Niners, it's okay in my mind, Chase, that they sat out the veteran free agent period largely because they were hitting a financial reset. But it's totally unacceptable, in my opinion, that they sat out the undrafted free agent market because it's so relatively cost effective, and it doesn't cost that much money, and it's a pool of players the Niners have had a lot of success in. And I bring it up because I'm reading an article today about the other team that you cover, the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Eagles, what they invested in the undrafted market just blows what the Niners invested out of the water. The Niners, I think, gave the most money to Stone Blanton. I think it was like $65,000 or maybe it was $92,000. I forget what it was. It was less than $100,000. The Eagles invested. They signed the Toledo safety, who Jake Hutchinson's a big fan of, Maxon Hook.
Yeah.
Right. They gave him $200,000 in guaranteed money, as well as $30,000 to sign, according to Over the Cap. So that's one guy they got who's a really good young safety. You think the 49ers could have used Maxon Hook, a really good young safety who, plays a position that they have injuries at and could use reinforcements? Absolutely.
Can help you on special teams right away.
Right. Eagles paid Florida running back Montrell Johnson. Oh, he got the same as Hook. He got $200,000 in guarantees. Was a little bit behind Hook as far as signing bonus. He got $25,000, but $200,000 for Montrell Johnson, $200,000 for Hook. And then you go further down the list, and it didn't end there. The Eagles also signed Holland Pierce. They gave him $30,000 to sign. $20,000 less in overall guarantees, so they gave him $180,000 to sign. And the 6'8", 340-pound Holland Pierce started at right guard in Eagles rookie minicamp with Mekhi Becton out of there. They plugged this kid in at right guard, and if nothing else, he's an offensive lineman of note and some massive size for a team that already had a great line. And then they gave B.J. Mays, the A&M cornerback who can play in the slot, they gave him a $25,000 signing bonus and $175,000 in overall guarantees. You look at the money that they threw around. They gave Shunderick Powell, another good return guy from Central Arkansas, who I think is going to be fantastic, $76,500 in guarantees, $13,500 to sign. They spent a whole lot more money than the 49ers, and they got a number of players out of it, and we'll see how many of them make the team. But the Niners have kicked butt in this area, and to chintz out and go cheap in the undrafted free agent market is so effing stupid and short-sighted that they deserve to be raked, and nobody besides yours truly is even going to mention it, because nobody sees the real value in undrafted players to begin with, and so they don't see the cheapness in cutting that entire market out of your game plan. The Eagles wind up getting 3 or 4 really solid players. I bet you Montrell Johnson, Quentin Hook, Maxon Hook, and BJ Mays and Holland Pierce. I bet you 3 out of 4 of those guys wind up making their team, and they're a Super Bowl champion. So, to me, I mean, sorry, I love Jed, love Kyle, love John, but you guys cheaped out in the undrafted free agent market, and it's going to cost you. And it was stupid. It was totally short-sighted. And how much did it possibly save you? $1 million? $1 million? You just had 3 families drop $510 million of cash in your lap, additional cash into your out. You couldn't find a way to spend $1 million or less on the undrafted free agent market. Very short-sighted, very stupid.
Yeah. And I definitely see where you're coming from. And it is so funny how you just look at the landscape of people who talk about the Niners. And I think it's always best to play everything down the center. Be willing to hear arguments and conversations and talking points from people on a variety of topics from all types of different spectrums. That's how I've always kind of tried to approach my coverage, and that's really what being objective is. And it's so funny how some fans will respond to things, but it's important to remember the word fan is short for fanatic. And so sometimes fanatics do not want to hear people talking bad about a player on their team or the team in general. And I ran into a situation this week where I was talking about why this Brock Purdy contract is a steal. And I threw out all of these numbers and all of these calculations, and people are in the comment section saying, "You're switching up on us, Chase. You were ripping Brock Purdy last year. Now you're saying this is a great deal." Well, hold up. Yes, I'm going to rip Brock Purdy when he tries to play hero ball. And in multiple instances down the stretch, when the Niners have an opportunity to drive down the field, win the ball game, and he throws an awful interception, do you want me to say, "Brock, at least you tried. At least you tried, man"? No, I'm going to say that's a bad decision. It's a bad throw. And so you criticize people when they do things poorly. That is our job. We react in real time. But I also will give credit where credit is due. And so with the Niners, yeah, they've spent nearly $1 billion since the Nick Bosa contract going into 2023. They deserve credit for that. That's a big reason why they have been one of the most talented and most successful teams in the National Football League. But man, you look at this UDFA market, you're telling me that after you don't draft an offensive tackle when Trent Williams is 37 and Colt McKivitz is going into the final year of his deal, when you don't have a legitimate backup tackle, that you can't give a bag to Holland Pierce? You gave a lot of money to Evan Anderson last year. He ended up making your team.
Right. You were proven correct.
Yes, there's clear value in that. Azeez Al-Shire, he did not get drafted by the 49ers. He is now a top 10 highest paid linebacker in football. And so the Niners couldn't have brought in Holland Pierce, who's 6'8", has very long arms, improved every year that he was at Rutgers as a run blocker, and has real potential either as a tackle or as a guard. You can't go out there and you can't sign a guy who you like, Larry, in Willie Lampkin following the NFL draft. He might be 280, 290, but he's quick. He's agile. He'd be a good scheme fit. He can't compete with Matt Hennessy and Drake Nugent to combat with Jake Brendel to be this team's starting center, and you continue to ignore offensive line. It's not to say that I don't like some of the UDFAs who the Niners brought in. Corey Kiner might make this team. Isaiah Nayer was the talk of rookie minicamp. 6'4", 220, he can run a 4.4, but you can do more and be more aggressive with that type of strategy, and that is where the Niners do deserve some criticism. I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here to credit where credit is deserved, but I'm here to point the finger where blame is deserved, and to go cheapo in the undrafted free agent market 1 year after you invested $380,000 in Evan Anderson, and if you look on your defensive line, the only guy outside of Nick Bosa worth a damn on your defensive line is Evan Anderson, probably. I mean, Evan Anderson. Yeah, I mean, outside of the rookies. I mean, the rookies this year. But, I mean, before West and Collins and Mikael Williams, what is the meat and potatoes of this defensive line? It's Bosa, it's Sam Aquinu, and it's Evan Anderson. Yeah. So, I personally...
He's probably the top backup defensive tackle if you don't count the rookies. I count them as starters, C.J. West and Alfred Collins, and I think that Evan Anderson is probably the top backup defensive tackle because I like him better than a guy like Jordan Elliott, who we know who he is at this point.
Well, and you look at the rest of that line, Kevin Givens, what was he? He was an undrafted free agent. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And this year, this was the wrong year I mean, how hard is it to understand when people are like, oh, Eric DaCosta said they normally have 120, 150 draftable players, and this year he's got well over 200. And other teams were saying the same thing. The depth of this draft is extraordinary, and you can get. So this is the draft. You decide to sit out the undrafted free agent market, and you let Jared Ivey go to the Seahawks, and you let the Eagles load up on 3 or 4 guys that you could have used, all to save less than $1 million. When you're going to spend probably more than that on some Super Bowl napkin holder in the upper deck. I mean, it's just absolutely asinine that they would sit out that market, and they deserve to get raked for it.
The other thing, too, let me just add this.
Yeah.
You read the Matt Barrows piece with Tariq Ahmad, and it was a really well put together piece, and it gave you insight for why the Niners like the prospects that they did. But I thought it was pretty interesting how they came to Junior Bergen, and Matt Barrows and Tariq Ahmad were talking about him, and they basically were talking about how when Junior Bergen was on the board, the Niners couldn't not draft him because special teams coaches were pounding the table for him because Brant Boyer's son plays at Montana. That's where Junior Bergen played. You didn't have to draft him, though. You could have signed him as a UDFA and addressed another position like the offensive line. That's another reach right there.
You had the inside dope on him. You have Anderson, who used to be in that program. You have Boyer's son was the kicker. You have a greater in than anybody in the league for sure. Why would you waste a draft choice on that guy? He was one phone call away from signing with you, probably.
Who's only a returner, by the way. He's not a
He's
wide
only
receiver,
a return guy.
Kyle Shanahan. Yeah.
Yeah. So how's this guy? You're gonna clog up a roster spot with a guy who's just a returner. This guy better be a freaking great return man. That's all I got to say about that. Yeah, he better make the 53, and Holland Pierce better not go on to a decade of the Eagles, or guys like me are going to bring that up all over and over and over again, and justifiably so. All right, the Tariq Ahmad conversation with Barrows. What stood out to you about that? There were a number of revelations in that piece. A lot of really, really good stuff I thought was in there. What stood out to you about it?
Yeah, honestly, shout out to Matt Barrows for putting that piece together in The Athletic, because it was really, really well done. And I don't consider myself a big J journalist. I used to be a journalist and a news reporter for one of the most watched local news stations in the entire country. I'm not that any longer, and there's a reason why I left that business. I absolutely love what I'm doing, but when I read a good piece of journalism, I will definitely give it a shout out, and I thought Matt Barrows did a fantastic job, and I thought Tariq Ahmad, who is the director of player personnel, he offered a lot of fascinating insight for why the Niners did what they did in the draft, why they selected the players who they took, and just the nuanced scouting detail of what went into those selections. And, a couple of takeaways just right off the rip. The Niners in the pre-draft process fell in love with 2 players who blew them away in interviews. That was Mykel Williams, who they took in the first round, and then Nick Martin, who they took, the linebacker out of Oklahoma State, a little bit later. And they just said that from a character standpoint, they were very impressed by them. And obviously that's not the end-all be-all. You want these guys to be good football players. But as far as the scheme fit for a lot of these prospects, the personality fit, how they fit the Niners playing style, that is something that I took away from in this article, but that's something that I was talking about following this draft. The Niners went in knowing they had to get multiple defensive linemen. That was revealed in this article. They also knew they had to get a little bit more athletic and more physically imposing. They were able to check that off with this draft. Robert Saleh had a big say in this draft class. That was confirmed with this article. But the Niners wanted to get back to their identity on the defensive side of the ball, which is fast, fearless, tenacious, playing with confidence, playing with swagger. They compared Barrows and Ahmad to Nick Martin to Dre Greenlaw. You certainly see a little bit of that. Chris Kosarek fell in love with a couple of these defensive linemen. And the lack of production that we saw from some of these defensive linemen like Michael Williams and Alfred Collins and CJ West, they think that the Niners, when they put them in this scheme, that they can really flourish because they thought that maybe they were playing out of position in a bad scheme in college, or just that they think that this scheme can really bring the best out of these players. They raved about Upton Stout. And so I like this Niners draft class specifically on the defensive side of the ball. I like it a little bit more after hearing the insight from Tariq Ahmad. And it does back up a lot of the things that I thought of after this draft was finalized by San Francisco. A player like Jordan Watkins is somebody who they absolutely fell in love with in the pre-draft process. Kyle Shanahan really likes him. Fast in the gauntlet, good ball tracker, 4.3 speed. And the other thing the Niners prioritize as an organization, and you've seen this with why they paid Brock Purdy and George Kittle and Fred Warner, they value character a lot. And they will make investments in guys who love football, have good character, and play the game the right way. And I think the Niners are really trying to get back to that after they kind of lost their way a little bit last year.
A lot of interesting parts of this article. One of the things that, and I don't know if I should fear this, but, Lynch drafted Solomon Thomas. Why? Because they took a class together at Stanford and this and that. And they drafted, he's drafted other guys because, he drafted Pearsall and Ayuk because he's buddies with Herm Edwards. And it's like, all I would say is I hope the Niners have personnel conviction on these guys and not just close proximity connections. Because it's like, so now they went big on Alfred Collins. And then Ahmad told us that he worked at Rutgers for 7 years with Kyle Flood, who was Texas's O-line coach, who said Collins destroys practice, the hardest guy to block. Okay, but that's practice. As Allen Iverson was said, what are we talking about? We're talking about practice.
Not the game.
Not the game. We're talking about practice. So I just hope that the Niners really liked Alfred Collins and their scouts really liked Alfred Collins, and then this was just like in the 11th hour to push it over the top. Oh, yeah, I know this offensive line coach, and he says he's killing it in practice. Hopefully they didn't just target this guy because of this one comment, because practice dominance is hard to prove. And the other thing, the one encouraging thing is it sounds like the Niners really think that there's pass rush potential in both Alfred Collins and CJ West that is untapped. That they were saying how CJ West is twitchy and powerful and he's got great instincts and short area quickness, but he doesn't get off the ball. And a lot of times, they got to work on getting off the ball. And that's like a major aspect of being a defensive lineman in the NFL is your get off. And they work on that constantly. Yeah. So they think they can speed up his get off, which should help West become more of a pass rusher. And then they think that Collins, who was asked to be more of a two-gapper at Texas in the Niners' one-gap penetrating, get-up-the-field approach to their wide nine, they think that maybe there's some additional pass rush there. So, to me, that's exciting. If Alfred Collins and C.J. West, who are both just really strong run defenders, can give you anything inside as interior rushers, that could make them very, very good picks.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that I saw with some of these players while in college. It's like, some of the production wasn't there, but as far as like defensive explosive plays or wow plays, they definitely provided that. I do think that they are good scheme fits for what San Francisco wants to do. They have the traits that the Niners really covet. And it's a big reason why I do think there's a realistic possibility that Michael Williams, Alfred Collins, CJ West, Nick Martin, and Upton Stout, that's 5 rookies, could all be starters for this team. Because
Connor Colby, I think, has got a shot too.
I just think they're the best players that you can play at those positions. So there could be growing pains knowing that they're inexperienced players. But, man, the stature, the athleticism, the physicality, the motor, and what they did in college, I think it translates really well to the NFL level.
What's left to do? Let's talk about that for a second. Grant has got an article up saying the Niners ought to sign Kazir White, who's the top linebacker, former safety, pretty powerful tackler, and a pretty good football player. I kind of like that idea, Kazir White. He was also throwing out another idea as well. I can't see who else he was advocating for, but what do you think? If you could add something, Oh, he was saying maybe the Niners should go after Julian Blackmon, Amari Cooper. He did looks like a series of these. The Niners ought to sign some of these guys. This is the free agent part of the year that does not count against the compensatory formula. So you can sign free agents without losing comp picks and so on and so forth. So that's something we know the Niners care about. If you could add one piece to the puzzle to try to help this team, because I like this 49er team to win 10, 11, 12 games, maybe even more. If they get off to a hot start, they may win 13 or 14. I think it's a really, really easy schedule, and I think they're a better team than people think. I don't think the defections that they've had are nearly as dramatic. They're more dramatic in number than they are in actual value. So I think 49ers are going to be okay, but do they need one more piece to get over the top? And if so, who would that be?
Yeah, you're asking for one. I'll give the people what they want. And I just have a couple of free agents that come off the dome as players who I think would make a lot of sense for the Niners. And what I think San Francisco and a lot of teams, frankly, are going to do at this point is that you have OTAs for the Niners coming up this upcoming week. Then you have mandatory minicamp early in June. You might go into training camp just trying to survey, check out this roster to see where you're at. Are the rookies ready to go? Do you believe that they can be contributors right off the rip? Or is there a little bit steeper of a learning curve than you were anticipating? And if that's the case, you might have to address a couple of different positions. And so along the offensive line, a guy like Brandon Scherf is available. He's a former top 5 pick and has been to multiple Pro Bowlers while with the Washington Redskins at the time and was most recently with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so that's a very experienced player who could help you along the offensive line. At wide receiver, Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen are both out there. That would hinge on the development and the leap that you're hoping to see from Ricky Pearsall. It could also be a health update on Brandon Ayuk. How is Jacob Cowing, Jordan Watkins, Isaiah Nair, Tariq Owens? How are they doing? What's going to happen with the potential suspension of a player like Demarcus Robinson? Amari Cooper is on a Hall of Fame trajectory for what he's been able to do throughout his career. He's different than a guy like Keenan Allen, who is more of that jump ball 50-50 guy who's not going to wow you with his speed. And so those are the two top wide receivers. Is Upton Stout ready to go in the slot? If he's not, do you move Diamador Lenore inside with Renardo Green on the outside? And then does Asante Samuel Jr. get a clean bill of health? He had to undergo a neck surgery. So that's a little bit of a concern coming off a year in which he missed a lot of time with a shoulder injury. But prior to last year, former second-round pick out of Florida State, they've developed really good corners. Deion Sanders back in the day, recent memory, Renardo Green, Azareye'h Thomas, Jalen Ramsey, and so they developed the heck out of really good corners. And Asante Samuel has had double-digit pass breakup numbers every year in his career prior to last year when he only played 4 games. So he's played primarily on the outside. Do you go Asante Samuel Jr. on the outside, Diamador Lenore on the inside, with then Renardo Green on the other side? At linebacker, C.J. Mosley was an excellent player under Robert Saleh during his time with the New York Jets. Missed a lot of time last year, but in 2023, he was one of the best linebackers in the game. That hinges on what you see from Nick Martin, D. Winters, Tatum Bethune, a guy like Jalen Graham. Can they make those next leaps? Do you feel confident in those players? Kaiser White has had 3 100 tackle seasons in the last 4 years. That's another player who I think could make some sense for San Francisco. And then at safety, Malik Mustafa, he had that surgery and that repair on his ACL. How long is he going to be out? How does Jason Pinnock, Richie Grant look alongside Jair Brown? Can Jair Brown rebound from a down year last year? If he does, he's going to be in that one starting safety spot. If he can't, you might need 2 safeties to start the year. And so you have Justin Simmons, you have Julian Blackmon and players like that. So those are free agents who are still available, who aren't going to break the bank, who I think make a lot of sense for the Niners for those reasons that I gave.
I would sit tight mostly because I think I would wait until, this next go round. Let's see camp. Let's see the preseason. Let's see what players shake free at the cut down or in August when, jobs are won, jobs are lost, rosters are shuffled, guys become available under the radar. I think I would hold off for the most part. But the one guy that's super intriguing to me is that I'm looking at, some of these teams post draft and reading some of the articles around the mini camps about the different reactions to the players, because the rookie mini camps is where you kind of find out, hey, you know what, this guy isn't just our fourth round pick. This guy's going to be our starter at wide receiver. This guy's not just our seventh round pick. This guy could be actually our compete for a starting job on the offensive line. I mean, this is where you kind of see that in rookie camp. There was the Locked On Jets guys did a whole breakdown on their wide receiver core, and they think Malachi Corley is going to get cut. And their argument was that Garrett Wilson's their one. They signed Josh Reynolds and Tyler Johnson as free agents. They still have Alan Lazard. That's 4. The talk of Jets OTAs has been the rookie from Georgia, Arian Smith, who was their 4th-round pick. And to me, that was a terrible 4th-round pick because the guy can't catch. But can run like the wind, right? He's one of the greatest athletes of any wide receiver in college football. Supposedly he's lighting it up in their minicamp. So that's 5 receivers. Then they have Xavier Gipson, who's a very accomplished return man who they really want to carve out a roster spot for him. So that's number 6. They also have Jamal Pritchett from South Alabama, who's a pretty good undrafted player. That's 7. And Corley would be 8. And I only bring this up because Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas is now a scout with the Eagles. Saleh, obviously now the defensive coordinator of the Niners. They traded up in the 24 draft in the 3rd round to draft Malachi Corley. Yeah. He only got 6 targets his rookie year. He caught 3 balls. He also downed the ball at the 1-yard line stupidly, thinking that he had crossed into the end zone. So that brought a lot of negative Jets fans on him. But if the Jets want to say goodbye to Malachi Corley because they love Arian Smith and Tyler Johnson and Josh Reynolds and Xavier Gipson, and they don't want to have 8 wide receivers. If I'm the Niners, that I would absolutely come correct on a significant offer for Malachi Corley. He's the most Debo-like player I think I've seen. They're not going to have Debo. They need a replacement. This guy could be it. I'd gamble on upside. I'd even be willing to throw a mid-round pick in 26 or a player to the Jets to make it happen. But if Saleh, okay to trade up in last year's draft, maybe he would be a fan of Corley and want to bring him to San Francisco. I know the Niners could use another receiver, but I'd rather it not be an old guy who makes money. I'd rather it be a young guy who, if he gets cut, he gets cut. If he makes the practice squad, he makes the practice squad. But there's no real financial, weight to the whole thing. What do you think of that idea? What do you think of trying to get a guy like Corley to the Niners mix?
Well, the youth movement would fit the route that they've really been on this offseason. And another option for San Francisco is to go about it this way, right? You go into training camp, you go into preseason, you examine your roster, but then you just monitor the waiver wire for roster cutdown day to see which quality players from other teams are going to be let go. And if there's a feeling that a player is on the roster bubble, might get let go, but you don't want to risk that player having to go through waivers to pick them up on the waiver claim, maybe you do trade for a player like Malachi Corley. A couple of other players, too, who I just want to mention real quick.
Yeah.
Because it kind of fits the Niners and what they might be looking for. Like Jadeveon Clowney is still out there if you need defensive end depth, if you don't like where you're at with Sam Okuwanu or your Turgros Matos. And then Zadarius Smith has experience playing in the wide 9, and he's been a productive player as well. So Clowney, Smith, 2 veterans, highly productive players throughout their respective careers. They could make sense for San Francisco. As far as Malachi Corley, there's been a couple of players the last few drafts who we have talked about as Deebo Samuel replacements, because it was always a possibility in your and I's eyes that the Niners could move on from Deebo. We kind of were ahead of this well before it actually came to fruition earlier this offseason. And this was going into when Deebo signed the extension prior to the 2022 season. And then the last 2 off seasons when there was some buzz that maybe the Niners could move off of Deebo because they were looking to prioritize Brandon Ayuk instead. And we ended up being right on that because the Niners traded Deebo away. But Malachi Corley and Traylon Burks are kind of 2 players who I've looked at as like Deebo Samuel type of players who can fulfill the role of Deebo as far as being that Swiss Army knife. Now, Malachi Corley went to Western Kentucky and he was taken in the 2024 draft. So this would be the Jets admitting that they whiffed and failed on that pick. But I really liked him in the pre-draft process. He ran a little bit slow, just under 4.6, but as far as how he's built a lot like a Deebo Samuel player. And as far as how he was utilized in 2022, he caught 101 passes for nearly 1,300 yards and 11 touchdowns. And then he also had 11 carries for 87 yards. Numbers went down in 2023. Couple of reasons for that. He was under 1,000 receiving yards, but he had 11 touchdowns once again. So he has just had the ability to find the end zone, and he has versatility to his game. Treylon Burks was a first-round pick out of Arkansas. Again, the Razorbacks used him in a Deebo Samuel type of way. He could end up getting cut by Tennessee. And so if you're looking for a player to fulfill that Deebo role, those are two players who could end up getting cut, let go, or you could trade for them and not have to give up too much.
Great stream. We'll call it right here on the way out. Give me one training camp, summertime, bold 49er prediction. You got a bold 49er prediction for what's coming up this summer. And it could be anything. It could be coaching. It could be anything. It could be, somebody wins a job. Somebody's a factor. Somebody gets hurt.
Yeah,
Give me a bold prediction.
I like it
on this summer.
I think the 5 rookies can start on defense. Michael Williams at defensive end, Alfred Collins at defensive tackle, CJ West at defensive tackle, Nick Martin at weak side linebacker. That's where I think the Niners envision him being, and then Upton Stout at corner. I also think that Connor Colby could start at left guard for the Niners and take down a Ben Barch, a Spencer Burford, or a Nick Sakel for that spot. And if Jacob Cowing doesn't show something, could he end up getting cut and be on the roster bubble? He has some wiggle and explosiveness to his game, but that's a pretty crowded wide receiver room for San Francisco.
How about you? What's yours? I got several bold predictions. One, I'll steal one of yours. I love the Connor Colby starting at guard. The guy made 50 career starts. I've studied his film extensively. I think he can do it. I think there's a very good chance he takes that job. I also think Corey Kiner outplays Jordan James. I really believe Corey Kiner is going to be a good player. And I'll say this, after just watching the workouts, Sebastian Valdez, just remember that name.
Okay.
Sebastian Valdez. He's a University of Washington kid who he finished tackle. Up at defensive tackle.
Yeah.
Undrafted, 6'4", 300 pounds. But you could just see in the rookie camp, this guy's got strength. This guy's got determination. He plays really hard. I CJ West and Alfred Collins, they got 2 jobs locked up, right? But after that, I mean, Jordan Elliott, Kevin Givens, Kalia Davis, Evan Anderson, that's going to be a pretty good competition. And it looks from afar like a 4-man competition between those guys, but throw Valdez in there and don't be surprised if Valdez outperforms those other guys, because the motor, the strength, the explosiveness. This guy's a player. This guy's a player. I'm pretty sure that 300 pounds when they put the pads on, this guy had incredible 34 reps on the bench, but then when you watch the film, there's functional strength, and then there's quickness there that really is great for a 300-pounder. They lined him up at defensive end at times. And looped him inside. So Sebastian Valdez, Corey Kiner, and I'm all about your Connor Colby. I think that's absolutely on the money.
Hard to find the scheme fits for a defensive tackle on a wide 9, but Valdez could be that.
Valdez looks. I'm telling you, he looks real. Let's just say there's real, and then there's guys like, that guy's not real. That guy looks real to me. David E says, Larry, can you ask Lynch why he wasn't more aggressive in a deep UDFA market? John, why were you not more aggressive in a deep UDFA market? I will say this. I did ask Lynch. I did ask the Niners if they could get Lynch for the show, and I haven't heard back. And if he saw today's show, something tells me he's not coming. Steven Reynolds says Chris Forster is responsible when he thinks the Niners O-line is good enough and shows love to Brendel. He won't say anything about Holland Pierce, but loves Drew Moss. Well, we'll see.
Colby
I mean,
too.
yeah, I mean, yeah, he loves Colby. I think Chris is a really good coach. It wasn't lost on anybody that Brock Purdy was and their wives were golfing with Jake Brendel at the Olympic Club when Purdy's contract became official. Then we just have to put our arms around it. The Niners think more highly of Jake Brendel than we do, than PFF does, and that's just the way it is. And we'll have to see how it. Yeah. Then we'll have to see how it shakes out this summer. Anyway, that does it for us. Thanks to Chase. Thanks to Pig in a Pickle. Thanks to Mancini's. The links are in the description for all of our sponsors. Have a great weekend. Chase, any big plans? What do you got cooking?
Man, I'm going to enjoy some good weather this weekend, but of course, always some great content coming out because the content never stops. You know how it goes.